Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Game Development Panel. My name is Emily Eklund with Empire State Development's Division of Science, Technology, and Innovation, known as NYSTAR. I will be your moderator for the next hour, and we've got a great session ahead for you. So this session is part of the NYSTAR Innovation Asset Showcase, which is focusing on a number of different high-tech industry clusters and highlighting key capabilities and innovations in New York State, with a focus on how companies can leverage the robust R&D ecosystem supported by NYSTAR. Back in 2016, NYSTAR designated 3 digital game development centers that are part of our Center of Excellence family today. In this panel, we are going to explore how gaming impacts our lives and the innovation assets available to us, to gaming professionals, and how they develop their technology in this space. We've got a great group. Today, we're going to hear from Rob Mostyn from RIT Magic Center, Ben Chang, the Director of the Games and Simulation Arts and Sciences Program at RPI, Dennis McCory from Possum House Games, and Aaron Lennox from ZephyrX. Before we kick off the discussion, I'd like to orient you briefly on a few housekeeping matters. First, please submit all of your questions in the Q&A function that you will find at the bottom of your screen. Your mics are all muted and the chat is disabled, so please remember to use that Q&A function. And we'll be ending promptly at noon so that you can all get to your other networking sessions. So first, now starting with Rob, then Ben, Denny, and ending with Aaron, please give our audience some background on you, your organization, and why you were drawn to this industry and the current organization you work for.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Emily. So my name is Rob Mostyn. I am the Digital Games Hub Coordinator at the RIT Magic Center. The RIT Magic Center kind of housing 2 organizations, the RIT Magic Center itself, as well as Magic Spell Studios. You can think of those as the RIT Magic Center being the academic side and the Magic Spell Studios being in the entrepreneurial side. And then I was drawn to this industry and to RIT Magic. I have a background, obviously playing video games, but I also developed music for video games and began developing my own video games. And that kind of led me to being interested in this industry. And it's a great one. It's a lot of fun. So I'm excited to be here today.
Ben, you're up.
All right. Hi, so I'm Ben Chang. I'm the Director of the Games and Simulation Arts and Sciences Program at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. We have a bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Science of Games and Simulation Arts and Sciences, which is a broad interdisciplinary game development degree. And we just launched a new graduate program, the Master's and PhD offerings in critical game design. My background is really as an electronic artist. I'm someone who's kind of an artist and a computer scientist, a little bit of both. And I've always been interested in interactivity as a creative art medium. I got into working in games and working at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute because I felt that games were really where the most interesting things going on in interactivity as an art medium were happening. So now we work with the Center of Excellence Digital Gaming Hub here, working with companies in our area and helping new companies form and get their games launched.
Hi, I'm Dennis McCory, artist and co-founder of Possum House Games. We're a small independent outfit based out of Rochester, New York. But yeah, I got into games similar to Rob and Ben. Like I started playing games when I was younger and kind of grew up with them. And then also I got interested as an artist to like the kind of questions that I could ask with games and what I could do with that medium.
I'm Aaron Lennox. I'm the Research and Clinical Trials Manager for ZephyrX, and we're a biotech startup based in Albany, New York. We focus on developing solutions for pulmonary function testing and respiratory therapy, and part of that includes video games for respiratory therapy. So I'm actually not a game designer myself. My background is in mechanical engineering and economics. I started doing grant writing with ZephyrX and some other small startups focused on more serious games in the region, and as ZephyrX has really taken off with a couple of big NIH grants and with COVID really creating an increased demand for our product, I've taken on this role with them.
Great, thanks everybody. So we're going to start off really broad. I'm going to put this out to all of you, and the order to answer is Denny, Aaron, Rob, then Ben. So what do you feel are common misconceptions about digital gaming or digital game development that non-gamers and developers should know?
So I can speak from experience in this one. What people hear getting started in game development is that you need to have a strong background in like programming, but that's not true. It's an extremely multidisciplinary field. Like it includes artists, musicians. I mean, if you're a good project manager or like a social media manager, like you're worth your weight in gold. So there's a lot of different avenues in. And there's a lot of new technology out there. It's making game development way more accessible to everyone.
Yeah, I think, one of the misconceptions too is that as a game developer, we're sitting around playing games all day. And that's really not the case. You'll often find us, deep in a Google search trying to figure out why this specific line of code isn't working. It's something it's problem solving, right? We spend a lot of time problem solving, going back and forth between why something isn't working and designing it right, making sure it's fun. That's one of the big struggles and misconceptions. Another one is that I like to point out is, the idea of having to be a gamer. I kind of like throw away that title. I think like, we don't say like, oh, I'm a movie watcher, I watch movies. Everybody's kind of interacting with games one way or another. So, it's kind of something that's made its way into our general culture in a way, which I find interesting.
I think for me, an important point is that games aren't purely for entertainment value. They do have great value in that, but they can also be used for training, for education, and even in the medical field for guiding people through physical therapy, or like we're doing through respiratory therapy exercises.
Yeah, and I think all these point to, for me, one of the things that's fascinating about games is that the kind of meaning and the kind of impact that they can have for us may be larger than we initially realize. Like we often think of games as something that's maybe like a frivolous activity, something that's like a kind of a surface enjoyment. But if you get under the surface a little bit, you can have these profound experiences with games like you can with any other medium, and you can use them for all of these additional practical purposes. And it has this kind of way of connecting out to so many other fields besides just what we might immediately think about as entertainment.
Thanks, guys and gal. So Denny, I'm gonna switch over to you. Possum House Games, I did some internet stalking. I saw you have 3 games on your homepage. Can you just give us a narrative about how a game goes from concept to publication? And just feel free to take us along those lines and give us your insights. And let's start there.
Okay. I'll try to condense this down as much as I can. So first off, we start with rapid prototyping, just real quick and dirty in a jam session over a weekend. And with that, we can, if we have an idea, we can test it out and experiment really fast, fail fast, and, can figure out like, oh, this is not working. Like when we first thought about it, it's like, oh, that seems like it'd be fun, but in practice, it's like, oh, this just does not work. So we can answer those questions really quick. And then from there, if we feel good about the prototype, what we do at Possum House is we break it down into like different tiers of like stretch goals, kind of. So we start with our bare minimum, like minimal viable product. It runs, it looks okay. It's a complete package. It's not ideal, but like if we have to pull the ripcord in development, like if something goes wrong or like budget runs out or something, you're like, well, we have a finished product. And then up from there, we have what we call our ideal MVP, where it's like, it's everything we want in there. It's like, yeah, we're happy with this game. It's like we could ship this and it's up to our quality standards. And then from there on, we just have escalating tiers of stretch goals of things that we don't technically need, but would be nice to have. And we prioritize these from like how doable they are. Like, yeah, we could add 5 more levels, don't need them, would be cool, to would be great if we had this whole extra character, and like another boss or something. So what that does is it frames our development from like, our worst case scenario is we have something done, something goes wrong, we're in good shape. And we also don't have to say no when we're like coming up with ideas. So we can just be as creative as we want. So we don't say no, we say yes, but if we can get to it. And then once we take that breakdown, we drop that into like our timeline. And it's just like, and we at Possum House, we're kind of getting started on like 3-month development cycles. They're very aggressive, very, very quick. And we just kind of like, you know, plug in that MVP milestone into that. And we just kind of go. And in development, if we feel really good about the product, like kind of at that ideal MVP stage, we have like a vertical slice. We can, if we're feeling really confident, we can pitch to publishers and then, you know, get additional funding where we can shoot for all of those super stretch goals. But if we don't, we just publish it on itch.io or Steam, throw a launch party and do it all over again.
So you mentioned actually kind of a couple of, I have just a quick follow-up for you. So how much of game development actually gets done in-house, and how much do you have to work with collaborators to develop the final product?
We do most of our stuff in-house. Like I handle all the art. I do a little bit of the programming. I do level design. My partner, he does, we're a two-man studio. It's just us. He handles programming. I do the art. We meet in the middle on like concept, game design, level design. We outsource our music, but other than that, it's just us.
It's impressive. So, Rob, can you describe how the Magic Center supports digital game development, and what, in your opinion, are the best assets that Magic can offer that you wish people knew about? Because it sounds like there is stuff that can be outsourced for those game developers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll start with the motto that RIT Magic has, and it's actually up on our wall when you walk in. And that's we learn by making things. And that's something that we kind of stand by, whether it's somebody who's a game developer in our building working, somebody working on a film, somebody working on an app. That's the heart of everything we do. Currently we have 2 programs, one called Magic Makers and one called the Magic Community Incubator. And they're very similar to one another. The difference is, and the way you can think about it, is one's geared towards our students, one's geared towards our community. Denny was actually part of our community incubator. And these 2 programs are meant to help those interested in the entrepreneurial side of games. You know, they might know how to make games and they might be able to make games, but then what about the second half of it? What about marketing? What about publishing? You know, especially our students, they work on I think it's a 16-week semester. That's not enough time to make a full video game, maybe a very small one, but you know, they often make a game and then have to move on to their next class, and that project kind of dies away. So when they do want to continue it, we have the Magic Maker program. In this program, they receive funding. They get to work full-time on their game. We provide the resources, the facilities, you know, whatever software they need, whatever hardware they need. For certain degrees, it counts as a co-op, which is basically a paid internship at RIT, but it counts towards that credits for them. So basically, you know, it's the dream job, right? They get paid to work on their game full-time, and they get college credit for it. So that's the Magic Maker program. The mirror to that is our community incubator. Functions much the same way. Funding to local independent game developers, who we often call it indie game developers. We provide them with funding, facilities, resources, same thing. Also mentorship is a big one with this. You know, Denny can probably speak to this. You know, sometimes with games, we come into them knowing how to make them and how we want them to look, but what about how we sell them? Who do we talk to about that? So we try and provide those connections, provide those resources, make those connections into the industry that we know. Often we would call it the AAA industry. That's the bigger studios. So those are 2 of the bigger things that Magic likes to focus on, the programs per se, but we're also a community resource. We have labs, we have film production studio. That's another big effort of Magic, is the film production side of things. And certain resources, certain facilities, parts of the building are open to renting, essentially, if that's something you don't have. So those are the ways we like to engage with the community, engage with our local game developers. We also stand up a lot of social events, meetups. Currently the Magic speaker series, we just had 2 developers from Vicarious Vision talk about working on the new Tony Hawk game. And this was a Zoom call that people could watch and kind of engage with. So really it's supporting them in the entrepreneurial efforts, but also kind of helping build that culture, get the word out that games are a thing. So often I've talked to people throughout Rochester and like, oh, I didn't know that RIT had a games program. Oh, I didn't know it was one of the top 10 in the country. I didn't know there were game studios in Rochester. These are the other things that we kind of have to focus on and kind of get out there.
It's just kind of funny because I feel like when we use words like gamer and game development, it kind of creates a boundary. And people like me, and maybe Aaron felt this way too, like you don't feel you can approach the community because you're not a gamer and you're not part of that. But it's really important to understand that games, in addition to being more than just entertainment, there's a large process behind creating the game, establishing the game, making the game look really good, the audience for the games. I think if nothing else, I'm kind of hoping our audience, who I was just looking at the polls, like 62% of the audience in this webinar or this Zoom don't consider themselves gamers. Right. And I'm wondering how much of that actually, maybe they are gamers, in whatever definition that we can create for it. But, this space is much larger and isn't naturally an exclusive space unless you're coming at it from an outsider perspective where I don't necessarily see myself in the community, but I could see it being a very open community for non-gamers, gamers, developers.
Very much so, and especially in the industry and the jobs itself. I could not do a great sales pitch for my game. If I was a growing studio, I would probably hire somebody to talk about my game who can talk and hype it up essentially. There's a lot of interesting pathways into the industry. One of the interesting things I heard was essentially like a consultant who talked about the architecture in video games, who was an architecture consultant to make sure they were doing it accurate. That's an interesting avenue into games.
For sure. Okay, so I want to switch the conversation slightly. I want to go to Aaron because ZephyrX, they're a really interesting gaming company. Your target audience is completely different and certainly is entertaining, but has a much larger purpose. So let's talk first to Aaron. Can you talk about ZephyrX, how they use gaming to disrupt medical device technologies?
Sure. So what we're doing is we're using breath-controlled video gaming as a way of replacing or supplementing traditional ways that deep breathing exercises are done. So we have 2 different main products that we use to do that. One is we have a suite of games called Breathe Easy that was developed in collaboration with the local game studio First Playable Productions. And this is a series of incentive spirometry video games. So if you've ever had any sort of surgery, abdominal chest surgery, you might have been given a plastic device called an incentive spirometer, where you have to, breathe in and hold, and you see a little piston move up or down, and then that's the end of it. So we created this series of games that essentially we use a Bluetooth digital spirometer to do the same thing. So your breath input is controlling a video game. So you're playing an Angry Birds style game where you're inhaling to pull back the slingshot, you're exhaling to launch the bird. And not only is that making the exercise more engaging, because it's connected to your phone, it's allowing you to track your progress. It's allowing your doctor to see your progress and to make sure you're actually sticking to these activities. The second product that is still in the development stages, we just got an NIH grant for this, is we're making a virtual reality game to coach people through, diaphragmatic breathing exercises. And again, we're working with a local game studio, Catapult Games. And for that, the user wears a chest and a stomach sensor. They put on this, the VR headset, and they see this imagery where they have to move, do the deep breathing exercise to make their stomach go up and down while keeping their chest still to make a butterfly float across the screen. And the idea with this game is that this type of deep breathing can be a form of physical therapy for people with back, neck, shoulder pain. But physical therapists have trouble prescribing it because, again, they just send their patient home to do deep breathing exercises and they have no idea if they're sticking to it. No one's just going to lie on the floor and deep breathe for 10 to 20 minutes a day because it's boring. So this is a way of making it more engaging. And the hope with this is that we can actually use this as a therapy tool to help reduce the use of prescription opioids as a first course of therapy, if they can try deep breathing before they result to something like that. So again, it's a game, but it's something that can have a really big impact.
So do you find that this type of approach with gaming also gets people to actually do their physical therapy? Is that what any of your results are finding?
Yeah, so that's what we're seeing, is that we're making it more fun and entertaining for people instead of something boring and tedious that they have to do. It's something that in some cases they actually look forward to doing.
That's fantastic. That's really interesting. Now, I want to hop to Ben because I believe you've done some work with ZephyrX, but can you, just like Rob did, can you talk about the Games and Simulation Arts and Sciences program at RPI and how it's helped companies, and just give us some overviews of things you'd like us to learn about what you guys do at RPI?
Sure. So we have several, I guess, kind of like in Rob's case with the Magic Center and the IGM school there, we have several different parts to what we do at RPI. So you could say the core of it is the GSASS program, Games and Simulation Arts and Sciences, which is, it's an undergrad degree. In that program, we're training students to be game designers, to be programmers, artists, game writers. We have students who are working on game audio, all the different areas within making games, and then also the practice of how they work together in interdisciplinary teams to produce things. So as a core part of the kind of like the talent training pipeline, we like to say, like any of these other great programs, we're training the next generation of great designers, developers and game makers. At the graduate level with critical game design, what we're looking at is trying to combine the like this practice of making games with critical reflection and analysis of games and their impacts, how they can be used, how they impact society, how they create meaning, these sort of larger questions that are really research questions. And tying those together from the academic side with the industry training of actually being able to make them, and kind of getting those pieces hooked together. Through the Digital Gaming Hub, the Center of Excellence, some of the things that we do there. So we also run a summer incubator type program. It's an entrepreneurship training program called Level Up State. And so this is for both student teams, recent graduate teams, other startups, indie developers. We developed this originally focusing on the capital region. And I'll just say one of the kind of like silver linings of this past year is that we were able to open it up to teams from all across the state because the entire thing was run virtually. So in that program, this is another one where where teams or early stage companies work on developing their company, their business plan, iterating through lots and lots of prototypes. So like Dennis talked about, like how you have to like prototype a lot of ideas, right? And like that's how you get to the ones that are really gonna crystallize and come together. So we do a lot of that, a lot of mentoring. Some of the, I guess, like assets that I'd like to just like mention from RPIs, we have particular strength in virtual reality and augmented reality, and also in artificial intelligence, not just within the GSASS program, but across RPI as a whole. And so this connects us into areas like manufacturing, and biotechnology. With the work that we're doing with ZephyrX, this is particularly around part of like the gamification part of one of their products. And the way that we started doing that was actually during this past 6 months, we were looking at ways that as a digital gaming hub, we could like support games that are going to make a difference or have some kind of impact in the COVID pandemic. And the work that ZephyrX is doing fits really squarely within that. Something else I didn't actually realize, Aaron, that you all were working with Catapult on the next thing. So this is another kind of cool example. So Catapult is a company who make VR games. They went through our incubator a few years ago. I actually met them at GameFest, which is a public sort of like event festival showcase thing that we host for schools from around the Northeast and also indie studios. And they were making this virtual reality game that was like a climbing simulator, like this rock climbing game. And it started off as a game that's just like really fun, right? So like, this is neat to take rock climbing and make that into a VR game because there's a lot of stuff that you can do in VR that's both like more crazy and also safer than what you can do in real rock climbing. And then as they were developing, they started thinking about ways that they could use this in a practical way for things like physical therapy. And it sounds like now they've actually like come around to that with you all. So this is it's actually a really neat story right there.
It kind of, you remind me something that I've been discovering as I've been learning more about gaming. And in addition to being just entertainment, this is actually opening a lot of opportunity for people who are limited in other ways. So something that was really poignant to me is that there are AR, VR opportunities for people with disabilities to be able to engage in doing something like a rock climbing, something they can't do every day necessarily, but they can experience it in a virtual setting. Or people who can't necessarily travel, they can take a bike ride through the countrysides in Italy and France, something that they wouldn't necessarily get a chance to do on their own. So in a way, gaming is opening up a lot of opportunity for people to experience the globalized economies and the globalized just cultures that we're able to connect with more. So, it's kind of a high level observation from listening to people like you who are working gaming to listening to gamers now that I'm becoming more engaged in this community. I just think it's really important for us to recognize that gaming is beyond, just those first player, first narrative games, or, like my fun 2 dots that I play every day. I mean, I leverage gaming technology when I go to explore the Louvre on the internet. I'm leveraging those technologies, and so are we all in everyday life without realizing it. So starting again with Ben and then going to Rob, can both of you give me your feedback on why programs like yours are important to gaming innovation and to gamers and game development companies in New York State or across the nation? Sure.
So I think, one way that they're important is really just as training this source of talent, so that companies in the state, both AAA studios and also mid-sized companies, indie studios, startups, that they know that there are multiple schools around the state that are focused on training students, not just in the individual disciplines that go into making games, but also how those work in a games context and how to work with other people in that context, and that they come out of our programs with, well, kind of like Rob said, like with that experience of really having done it, that it's not just theoretical, but they've had hands-on experience, going through the process, going through iterating design ideas and negotiating those and figuring out the constraints for games and prototyping some more and making ideas and throwing many of them out, and it's like going through that long slog to get to something that's actually finished, that you can put out there into the world for people to play. That they have that really almost kind of real world experience in the classroom already is, I think, a big part of it. A second thing I guess I would mention is that having these academic programs also creates that space for critical inquiry. While I teach in an engineering school, I'm a liberal arts person at heart, right? And so I think it's important for students, as they're learning the nuts and bolts of it, the craft of it, that they're also like learning to think in creative and expansive and critical ways, because that's how this whole field expands and goes further, is having that kind of both practical knowledge and intellectual curiosity to it.
Yeah, jumping off Ben's point a little bit there. Making games is a social thing. I'm primarily a solo developer, but I still work with people on my games. I've still hired people to help me finish my games. And part of that is knowing how to communicate. And that's, that's something that we're starting to focus a little bit more at RIT. We recently had a producer who worked in the industry for over 10 years. And, what he brought to the table was he wasn't a developer. He wasn't coding. He wasn't doing art. He wasn't doing music. He was helping the students see how you manage a team. Okay, is there a production lead? Is there a team lead? And how does this person not, hold people accountable necessarily, but how do they help the team along and achieve their goals, pivot when they need to? These are skills that are transferable to many different industries. And that's something, especially in games, where people feel very strongly about their ideas, where, you say, well, we're doing this and it looks just like this and that's good. And somebody's saying, no, that means it's bad. And how do you navigate those tough conversations and those tough discussions? So that's, I think that's something important that we're bringing to, especially with our students, to academics. Something else too about games, especially academic degrees, is that it's still young. Like we're a young degree. Helping get the word out there. It's adding a sense of legitimacy to the industry, that now this is something you can study. This is something you can get a degree in. We offer, again, both bachelor's and master's, but just adding that sense of legitimacy, that it's not, the culture used to be that, oh, it's for young boys, it's for kids that are boys, and that's changing. We're trying to change that, and this is adding to that. Again, to Ben's point, a little bit here is that we're also trying to change the type of games, right? Through the discussions about games, serious games is something we're seeing more and more. Obviously what Aaron's doing, we also have a local studio called Second Avenue Learning, who does serious games. They just recently did a game on the 19th Amendment and voting rights. These are important things, and bringing in the game elements to this, and letting people know that this is how they can get into games. Maybe I don't want to make the big explosive type games. I want to make more serious contemplative type of games. That's something that we hope, at least, we're bringing to the industry.
So on the flip side of it, starting with Dennis and then Aaron, why are programs like Ben's and Rob's important to companies like yours?
Going off of a few things that we mentioned earlier, a lot of these programs are still very young. I know when I got started, a lot of these game development programs really were just getting their feet off the ground, and they were very programmer heavy. At the time, I was a true blue, fine art student. So I was like, that's not for me. So then when programs like this came around, like the community incubator program, it opens, it creates a bridge for people with more unconventional backgrounds to get into the industry. And talking more about Rob was going off of, just I had so much access to I was able to work with a producer. They put me in contact with marketing professionals. I was working in a professional environment. I wasn't working by myself. I wasn't that little solo dev anymore. I had an office space, and I was able to bounce off of my peers and ask questions and just work with people. And that was huge. Just getting all that different input and all that, even validation too. Because when you're working by yourself, that's kind of what happens. There's that macro of how people look at the games industry, like Rob was talking about, and then there's on that micro of just oh, you're a hobbyist. It just takes you to that next level.
And I think for us, it's really important that we have that talent in our area. We have access to these people that have gone through these programs. Ben mentioned that one of the companies we work with went through the RPI incubator, and we have another game designer and digital artist we're working with right now that's an RPI alum. So just having access to those people with those skills and talents that have gone through those programs is really big. And additionally, like Ben mentioned, we're working with them on a small COVID-related project, developing a game for coaching people through pulmonary function testing. And it can be hard, if you're a startup, it can be hard to find funding, especially if you just need a small chunk of funding like that. You're not going to get venture capital right off the bat. Going up for big grants, you're going up against big companies, and if you're going for federal funding, it can take you a year to get the funding. So having, small grant programs like that help studios or developers put together small games and actually get them out there in the market is really huge.
Popping up in our conversation, and I want to address them, and I want to apologize to everyone. They're not necessarily on our things that we've discussed before, but a little vocab. We've talked a couple of times. It's been brought up: indie versus AAA, and also we've talked about money a couple of times. It's popped up in a couple of things. So first, transitioning from to indie versus AAA. Rob, can you explain what indie is versus AAA, and explain how Magic works with either of those categories? And then when you're finished with that, Ben, can you then also pitch how Magic works with indie versus AAA?
Yeah, sure. So, and I'm painting with somewhat broad strokes here, but we use the term indie, independent, typically with, anybody from a hobbyist who's working, in their bedroom, after their full-time job, covering up to studios that are self-funded, studios that don't work with a larger publisher, don't have financial backing, don't have the backing of a large company like Activision, Sony, Nintendo. And then those companies, the Sony, Activision, Nintendos, those are the AAAs. These are the large companies, hundreds of people working on a game, financial backing. They don't have to necessarily worry about the publishing side. And, often with these AAA studios, you'll see like somebody like Activision, they actually own a studio, Vicarious Visions out in Albany. While Vicarious Visions is the developer, Activision is the publisher. And that's kind of the relationship that's often had there, where, for example, a local studio we have is called Workin' Man. They're a small studio, maybe 30-ish people. They publish their own games or they do client work. They've worked with Nickelodeon, Fisher-Price, that sort of thing. Or they've self-published their games or, had conversations with smaller publishers. It's an interesting way. In certain ways, it's like the music industry where you see large record labels and then smaller record labels. You're kind of seeing some of that. But one of the ways we work with them is obviously supporting indies. I mentioned the Community Incubator Program. But then our connections with the AAA are often with our alumni. We have a lot of students who go to work for AAA. And we like to stay connected with them and they like to stay connected with us. Often we'll see a studio contact us, say, hey, we hired a couple RIT people and we really like them. We want to keep in contact with you. And that kind of relationship develops. Also bringing them in for talks, bringing in our alumni from AAA for talks, connecting them with people like Denny, people who could use those resources, maybe not necessarily looking to go into AAA, but looking to hear how things are done, maybe how to take an approach, that sort of thing.
So Ben, how do you work with indie versus AAA?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's tricky about the terminology is that AAA and indie, or what's now called III, which is sort of like higher quality, higher production value indie. On one level, this is about just how the company is organized. Or on another level, it's like how big the company is. And then it's also used as a way of talking about kinds of games or like genres or styles or what it is that you're trying to do with the game. So, one of the ways the term indie gets used is so similar to, independent music or independent film, the notion of having an independent voice. So indie is often used to characterize games that have more of an auteur quality to them, more of a unique perspective, a unique story to tell. And it's meant as a kind of like an alternative to what you might call like mainstream game production. And some of this has to do with the economics of scale, of how really, really large AAA games are funded and produced, and like all of the massive money and work that goes into those versus smaller games that can be made by smaller teams. One of the interesting things that's happened in the indie space over the last 10 years has been a kind of like multiple levels of independent studios. So there are indie studios that are like one person or just a couple of people, and are making like very small, very lean games, very sometimes like very quirky, very unusual, very unique, experimental kind of work. Sometimes like these are the people just coming out of school or just starting out. Then there are other indie studios that are really actually formed by like top tier talent, you might say, like people who have been in the industry for 20, 30 years, have risen to leadership positions in larger companies and now have left and struck off on their own, and are getting together like equivalently experienced teams to make these incredibly well-produced, high-quality kinds of games, but just outside of the kind of like large publisher structure. And like we're seeing that in the state, in New York as well. I would call One Studios an example of that. So there's like a whole like diversity to the ecosystem of how people are making games. I guess how we work with them at RPI, on the indie developer side. One of them is, of course, by preparing students to go that route if that's something they want to do after graduation. Preparing them to think of their games as their game making as potentially an independent activity, giving them access, like kind of mentoring and knowledge about the business side of it, particularly through the incubator programs. To think through the economics of how you actually do this once you get out of school. And then also by working with other organizations like Tech Valley Gamespace, which is a kind of a collective here in Troy. This is an example of, there's a number of these like around in Rochester and in Buffalo and in New York City, that are community organizations to support solo and indie developers. And then on the AAA side, so we prepare students for those kinds of careers as well, and we also try to work closely with these larger studios to understand what their sort of shifting needs are beyond like just the basic technical and craft training, like what this what this means to work in those kinds of companies now, what kinds of things they're looking for, and we feed that back into the curriculum that we're developing to kind of keep current. Oh, actually, sorry, I thought of one other thing. This is so something that RPI does a fair amount with is partnerships with large companies, and these have tended to be at like a different, like a larger kind of a scale, in manufacturing, in aerospace, in computer engineering and software and things like that. But we'll build partnerships around particular research interests. So, for example, we have a large project in collaboration with IBM around artificial intelligence and machine learning. That kind of thing. So this is, as a research institution, something that we're always interested in pursuing as well.
Fantastic. Super interesting. Great to hear everyone can work both ends of the spectrum. Can we talk about that community thing that keeps popping up? Because both of you said community, and Dennis and Aaron both started nodding their heads. So maybe let's jump to that topic of conversation. I'd like to ask Dennis, what is the gaming community to you? How do you benefit from it? What gaming communities are you a part of in your work at Possum?
So here in Rochester, we're obviously really connected to Rock Game Dev, Rochester Game Development, which Rob is the head of. And I mean, community is huge. It's where I found my business partner. It's where I found my musician. When I launched my first game, I was able to just like post on like the Rock Game Dev forum. Like I hit a bug like on the back end of Steam, and I was just able to be like, help, red alert. And like 10 people jumped in just like, oh yeah, this is how you do it. And it's stuff to like, having those resources to like assist you, but then there's just being able to hang out and not work in isolation. Like we have like weekly like Discord co-working nights where we just like hang out and share ideas and percolate and bounce off each other. And that's just so huge for the creative process, and just not working in isolation. But yeah, no, community's huge.
Aaron, does ZephyrX get involved in a lot of these gaming communities in the capital region?
A bit. I mean, one way is that it's really helpful for us to help to find game developers and to find small companies that we can work with. So we've been to a couple events where, it's different small businesses presenting sort of what they're doing, and we can see, if any of those would be a good fit to work with us, to partner with us.
And Rob, is Rock Game Dev part of the Magic Center, or is that something separate?
It's something separate. I formed it 5 years ago now, before I was at the Magic Center. It was just started as a meetup group every month, and is now formed into a nonprofit. But we do hold events at Magic. Obviously, our events being held at the RIT campus helps scoop up a lot of the students there. It gives them the opportunity to sit next to somebody like Denny or another local developer who maybe has a little bit more experience with publishing a game and seeing it through, and then gives local developers the opportunity to talk to students who are like getting to study this. It's a nice kind of like give and take in that way.
Ben, what are the capital region communities that RPI is part of or just knows about and brings their students to?
Sure. So Tech Valley Game Space, I mentioned. So this is it's a kind of a co-working space and also a community organization. So they kind of started, like many of these places, as just a way for people to have a physical place to go to, so that you're not developing your games all by yourself, and that you have a community of like-minded individuals around who can help you when you face practical questions, but also be somebody to like a group to bounce ideas off of, and to sort of share inspiration and energy with. And they're also housed in the Tech Valley Center of Gravity, which is a makerspace downtown in Troy. I think there are a number of like overlapping, interconnected communities around the area. So, of course, there's the IGDA, International Game Developers Association chapters, here in the capital region, and just one in Rochester, right, in New York. So this is like a sort of a global community for game developers. And one thing I wanted to mention also about community is making communities welcoming, right? So Emily, I think you mentioned like this kind of there can be this kind of feeling of a barrier of a gatekeeping that many of these games-related communities can have, both for players and also for game designers and game developers. One of the things that Tech Valley Game Space talks a lot about is this notion of like widening the pipeline, if you will. So as educators, like we're thinking about, students in middle school and in high school getting engaged with STEM, getting with STEAM, with its different aspects that might feed into careers in games. And then, we're teaching college and graduate level games courses. And then, there's a kind of a pipeline that develops. So how do you get more voices into that pipeline, more perspectives, more people able to enter into that? One of the things that's important is finding more ways for them to enter in. So it's not one single pipeline, but it's broadened out so that you have, like ways of welcoming people into the community and the practice of game making at kind of like any point in their life, like wherever you're at. Everyone's got a story to tell. Everyone's got a game that you probably can make. And making those kinds of spaces that are open and welcoming and supportive is a really important part of that.
I'm glad you're saying all of this. You're opening a door to a much larger topic I'm hoping that we can get into. So if no one minds, let's just jump right into this. We're talking about voices, and I think it's very important to show diversity of voices and diversity of backgrounds being shared in communities, especially in future communities like gaming. It's the future of where we're going in many technology spaces. So let's see. I'll start with you again, Ben. What is the diversity of gaming currently? I don't see a lot of women in this space. I'm not sure I see a lot of people of color in this space. I'm not sure I see a lot of socioeconomic diversity in this space. What is your impression of diversity in this space, and why do you think that the diversity spectrum is where it is? I want to do Ben, those questions. Then I want to hear from Dennis and Aaron. Rob will get to you as well. But first, Ben, then Dennis, then Aaron, please.
Yeah. So I think one of the it's one of the barriers that we're continually working on to increase and improve diversity on all of those different axes. Like some of that has to do with the kind of pipelines that have long existed. Some of that, frankly, has to do with marketing, to my mind, particularly sort of starting around the Xbox console era of games. And stretching from like the 90s across the 2000s up until we kind of get to the mobile revolution, and then the indie revolution, which revolutionizes how games are played and what kinds of genres and places they can be played, and then also access to being able to make games and to be able to get funding and make money from games. So there's a kind of an historical inflection point around 2008 to 2010 that has broken that open to some degree, and that we're still continuing to build on. The IGDA that I mentioned does surveys of game developers. So there's like continuing demographic data that they're polling across the whole global industry there. One of the ones that I have off the top of my head is about 30% women to 70% men, and that's really rough. Also, it's I think something like 30, you might say 30 to 35% women and non-binary, right, versus self-identified male in the games industry as a whole. Some of this builds from kind of imbalances that exist in the disciplines that feed into games. So some of this has to do with imbalances that are in computer science education, which also are a historical thing, like in a way, a kind of a historical aberration that we're living through and recovering from that never used to be this way, that there were fewer women taking computer science majors. And there were like specific things that happened in academia that made that happen, that we're now working to undo. So I guess several of the different pieces of this. So it has to do with culture, in like really really dramatic and like sharply highlighted ways, with how people treat each other, what kind of cultures are deliberately developed or allowed to develop inside large game studios, and how that feeds out to the rest of the industry. And it also has to do with how we engage with students, with young people as they're coming in. I guess like some other examples I could mention just around our area. We were also working with the Questar 3 BOCES, who work with Vicarious Visions on a teacher training program to embed high school teachers into the Vicarious Vision studio in the summer to kind of train them to begin bringing these learnings back into their classrooms. For a number of years, we've run a program working specifically with First Playable and the Games and Education organization called the Teen Game Workshop, that was designed as a free summer camp for games. So one of those early barriers is like, what kinds of schools have game design as part of the curriculum? What kinds of extracurricular clubs, camps, summer camps, programs provide that kind of training, that kind of entry point of exposure for young people to get into it, and then who has access to those? And so, and kind of like all along these stages of the pipeline, opening up access in different ways is, I think, an important part of it.
And then going beyond the pipeline, I would say one of the challenges is that it's still an industry where you're expected to put in crazy hours, and there's big milestones, and there's mass layoffs, and women still tend to statistically be more likely to be primary caretakers for children or elderly family members. And those type of careers don't necessarily work for someone in that situation where they're taking care of somebody else. And I think companies are, working to acknowledge this and improve, but I still think there's, needs to be some progress made there.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that's making me hopeful about all of this is the rise of the indie revolution that Ben touched on, and the growing accessibility of these programs. People can just bypass a lot of these hurdles now. If you have an internet connection, you can find programs and just get started on your own. And like this movement, it's open to so many different voices. Like if you look at the Steam library, which is the popular place to get games, versus itch.io, they're two completely different libraries. Like itch is just so varied with so many experimental, even just like gameplay design, like just wacky ideas, and then just so many voices. So that's something it's been really beautiful to watch grow.
I feel like this is a topic that could be its own panel, and I feel like the diversity topics are always like that. Rob, did you have any input into this conversation you'd like to add before we head to our closing comments?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, something as a founder of Rock Game Dev, you know, I always was like, hey, come hang out. We love to have everybody here. Even if you don't make games, you can talk about them, you know, play our games and tear them apart. But one of the things somebody actually called me out on, and I can't thank them enough, was, you know, there's a difference between standing in your house, opening the door and saying, hey, we're inclusive, come hang out. And there's a difference between that and actually going out in the community and talking to people. So we started to make an effort to like, go give talks, go give free workshops, engage with people around our community. And I mean, not only does that help membership, obviously, but that just helps engage people who might not have heard about us other way, and meeting them where they're comfortable and meeting them where they're at. I think that's something that was like a very, very crucial learning point for me and for our community as well.
I think that's a really good point. And I think especially with women, getting women engaged, it's been shown time and time again, and no matter what community group or what reason you want to engage women in, but women need to feel like they're invited in. A lot of times, you know, we see it a lot with them. It's an election year, so we talk about politics. You know, women are less likely to run for office, but if someone says to them, hey, you should run for office, they're more likely to then actually run for office. But they need someone to be that person first to say, you know, you fit this mold that is appropriate for that pathway forward, you should do it. And I think it crosses all technology areas, all industry sectors, all levels of industry. So I just think it's very important moving forward, especially in gaming, to be not just inclusive, but, you know, like almost to the point of obsessive about, you know, show up, just be in the room. You know, your voice is part of this conversation. And I think that's something moving forward. It's great to hear other people see that and encourage it. So we've got 3 minutes according to my clock. So 3 minutes, 4 panelists is going to be really fun. Final thoughts, a closer for all of you. Please give me just a quick elevator pitch on where you think the future of digital game development is going. What do you think the next frontier is? We will go Dennis, Rob, Aaron, Ben, and that's only because that's how you show up in my Zoom chat. So please, next frontier.
Kind of going off of what I was talking about earlier, games are only getting more, the tools are getting only more accessible. Like indie is just going to keep expanding and getting bigger until everyone's just kind of making games as like hobbies. Like I think it's becoming just really normalized.
Yeah, definitely that more interesting voices, more unique voices. Then expanding games into, you know, we use the word gamify, and, you know, there's some issues with that, but I like the idea of bringing those elements into other parts of our life. How do I gamify my routine of house cleaning? I think that's something that could be explored and is kind of fun.
Building off of that, I think continuing to gamify different medical technologies. So prescription video gaming is a brand new field. The first FDA approved prescription video game came out this June. So you can actually be prescribed a video game as part of your medical treatment. And I think we're going to see more of those games in the future.
Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Zoom froze for me just for a moment there. Yeah, what kinds of things are we going to see? I think we're going to see, yes, more growth in serious games and applied games. And I think we're going to see growth across all the different areas. You know, so the big budget, flashy titles, the indie experimental titles, all of that kind of work. I think cloud-based and streaming games is going to be a really interesting thing. I do think that VR and AR will continue to have a future in games as entertainment, and then also really as applications of gaming technology to other fields.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. For those audience members, this session's been recorded. It will be provided to you in a post-event email. Everybody's LinkedIn profiles or bios are on the Showcase website. Please check us all out. Everyone has some really interesting stuff to add to this conversation. Thank you for being with us and enjoy the rest of the showcase. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.